The phone lines were cut on a Tuesday morning. I know that because it was garbage day, and I remember standing at the end of the driveway watching the truck pull away, thinking, this is the cleanest my life has felt in 2 years. Let me back up. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a site supervisor for a civil engineering firm out of Hamilton, Ontario. I retired early, not because I had to, but because I'd saved carefully my entire adult life and my knees were starting to argue with the job. My wife passed away 11 years ago. Breast cancer. After that, I lived alone in the house we'd bought together on the escarpment, kept it up, paid it off, planted tomatoes every spring. I was fine. Quiet, but fine. I met my second wife at a community pottery class of all places. She was warm and funny, and she laughed easily. Her name was Louise. She had a grown son, 26 at the time, named Brett. She told me he was finding himself. I nodded like I understood what that meant. I didn't ask enough questions. That's on me. We got married after 2 years of dating. Small ceremony. Her sister and my brother as witnesses, dinner at a place on King Street. It was a good day. I remember it as a good day. Brett was living in a bachelor apartment in Stony Creek when we got married. Louise helped him with rent occasionally. I knew that going in, I didn't make a fuss. He was her son. She loved him. I understood loving someone enough to keep catching them when they fell. The trouble started 6 months in. Brett lost his apartment. He said his roommate, he'd moved to a 1-bedroom by then, had skipped out without notice and left him holding the full rent. He needed somewhere to stay. Just for a month, Louise said. Just until he gets back on his feet. I said yes. I said yes because she asked me with those eyes and it was her son, and what kind of man says no to that? We have a finished basement, separate entrance, its own bathroom, small kitchenette. I'd originally planned to use it as a workshop, but I hadn't gotten around to setting it up properly. Brett moved in with 3 garbage bags and a gaming chair. The month came and went. He was quiet enough at first, kept to himself mostly. He ate whatever was in the fridge. I noticed that, but I let it go. He didn't contribute to groceries, but Louise started buying more whenever she went. I figured she was quietly supplementing. I didn't bring it up. Around month 2, his car needed work. The alternator, he said, he needed $400 to get it fixed or he couldn't get to job interviews. I looked at Louise. Louise looked at me, and I wrote a check. $400. He said he'd pay me back when he got his first paycheck. There was no first paycheck. Not then. The car got fixed. He drove it to his friend's place most evenings. I'd see the lights on down in the basement until 2 in the morning sometimes when I got up to use the washroom. I didn't say anything. I kept telling myself, this is temporary. Louise kept telling me the same thing. He's looking. He's got a lead. He's got an interview. He's sensitive, she'd say. He doesn't want to feel like a burden. He didn't act like someone who felt like a burden. In February, this was now 8 months in, I got a notification on my phone. I'd set up account alerts on my TD checking account a few years back, mostly because I'm old-fashioned and I like to know what's happening with my money. The alert said a new authorized user had been added to one of my accounts. I hadn't added anyone. I called the bank, sat on hold for 20 minutes. When someone finally answered, they told me that a secondary card had been issued on my account 2 weeks prior. The name on the card was Brett. I want to tell you I was furious in that moment. But honestly, my first feeling was a kind of cold stillness, like when you step outside in January and the air hits you before you've braced for it. I asked Louise about it that evening. Calmly, I sat down at the kitchen table with my tea and I said, "Can you explain to me how Brett got a card on my account?" She said she'd meant to tell me. She said he'd needed some things, winter boots, she thought, and a few groceries. and she thought it would be easier. She said it was only temporary. That word again. I asked to see the statements. She got quiet. Then she said she didn't think that was necessary, that I was making something out of nothing, that Brett was trying. I pulled them up myself that night on the computer after she went to bed. 3 months of statements on that account. He hadn't bought winter boots. He'd bought a new gaming headset, $240. He'd bought dinner for what looked like several people at a pub in Burlington twice. He'd bought something from a streaming service I didn't recognize. He'd filled his gas tank 8 times. Total, just over $1,900 in 3 months, on my account, without my knowledge. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the next week watching more carefully. I didn't say anything. I needed to understand the full picture before I reacted. That's something I learned on job sites. Never make a decision from the middle of an emotion. Wait until you can see the whole thing clearly. What I saw clearly, Louise was also quietly transferring money to Brett from our joint account. Small amounts, spread out. 200 here, 150 there. Never enough to trigger a conversation, just enough to add up. Over the past year, it totaled just under $4,000. We had a joint account for household expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries. I deposited a fixed amount from my pension and my savings each month. She deposited a smaller amount from her part-time bookkeeping work. The rest of my money was in accounts I'd held since before we married. Or so I'd thought. I called my brother one afternoon while Louise was at work. He's 67, been through his own difficult marriage, knows how to listen without jumping to fix things. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "Have you talked to anyone at the bank?" I said I was planning to. He said, "Do that first, before you say anything at home." Good advice. I took it. I went to the TD branch on Upper James the following Thursday. I sat down with an advisor, a younger woman, very professional, and I explained the situation. I asked about removing Brett as an authorized user, closing the secondary card, and reconfiguring the account so that no new users could be added without a specific in-branch visit from me personally. She walked me through all of it. We did it right there in about 40 minutes. Then I opened a new personal checking account, just mine, moved my pension deposits to it, redirected my investment withdrawals, left enough in the joint account to cover the month's bills, hydro, internet, insurance on the house, and nothing more. I also called the phone provider. This is the part I had fully thought through in advance. Brett had 2 lines on a family plan that I'd added 18 months ago, again at Louise's quiet suggestion, because it would save money overall. It did save money. It also meant I was paying for his phone and his tablet data every month. $58 a month, to be exact. I called and removed both lines. Ported my own number to a new individual plan. Done. I drove home. Made myself dinner. Waited. Louise got home around 5:30. She came to the back door the way she always did, set her bag on the counter, started talking about her day. Normal. Ordinary. I let her finish. Then I said, "I need to talk to you about some things." She could tell from my voice. She sat down. I didn't raise my voice. I laid it out the same way I'd lay out a project brief, clearly in sequence without editorializing. The unauthorized card, the $1,900, the transfers from the joint account, the $4,000. I told her I'd already been to the bank. I told her the card was canceled, the account reconfigured, and that I'd moved my personal deposits. She stared at me. Then she said, "You didn't have to do all that. We could have talked." I said, "I'm talking now." She said Brett would pay it back. She said he was close to something, a job lead, a friend with a business who was going to bring him on. She said I didn't understand how hard things were for young people right now, how expensive everything had gotten, how difficult the job market was. She said I was treating her son like a criminal. I said I was treating the situation the way it deserved to be treated. She pushed back her chair and went downstairs. I could hear her knocking on Brett's door, could hear the muffled conversation through the floor. About 10 minutes later, Brett came upstairs. He wasn't angry. He was something worse. Sulky. Performatively wounded, the way someone acts when they know they're caught but want to reframe themselves as the victim. He said he couldn't believe I'd done this without talking to them first. I said, "How long have you had a card on my account?" He said that was different. His mom had set that up. It wasn't his fault. I said, "Did you use the card?" He didn't answer that. I told him quietly that I wasn't his father, but I was the owner of this house and the person responsible for the finances that had been funding his life for almost 2 years. I told him I thought it was time we had an honest conversation about what the plan was, a real plan with a real timeline. He said he didn't appreciate being interrogated. I said, "Then let's call it a discussion." Louise came back upstairs. For the next hour, the three of us sat in my kitchen and had the most uncomfortable conversation I can remember having in a long time. Brett laid out reasons: the job market, his anxiety, some friction with a former employer that had made things complicated, some debt he was carrying that he hadn't mentioned before. Louise kept intercepting, softening, translating, like she was his press secretary. I listened. I let them talk. I didn't interrupt. When they finished, I said I was sorry he was having a hard time. I meant it. I've had hard stretches in my life too. I understand that things don't always go the way you plan. But I said the arrangement as it currently existed was not going to continue. I was not going to have money leave my accounts without my knowledge. I was not going to be responsible for phone lines I hadn't agreed to maintain indefinitely. And if Brett wanted to keep living in the basement, I expected a realistic plan. Job, income, contribution to the household to be in place within 60 days. Brett said 60 days was unrealistic. I said, "That's where we are." Louise looked at me like I'd become a stranger to her. Maybe I had. Or maybe she was seeing, for the first time, that I wasn't going to keep adjusting my edges to accommodate something that had long since stopped being reasonable. They went back downstairs. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, watched the streetlights come on over the escarpment. I felt tired. I also felt like myself again in a way I hadn't in a long time. The next few weeks were tense. Louise and I spoke less than usual. She was present, but somewhere behind glass. Polite, careful, not quite there. Brett, for his part, actually did apply to a few places. I know because she told me with a kind of quiet hopefulness the way you'd share good news from the hospital. Small steps. Then something shifted. About 5 weeks after that kitchen conversation, Louise came to me on a Sunday morning. She sat across from me at the table. No performance, no softening this time. She looked tired in a real way, like she'd been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. She said, "I know I've asked too much of you." I didn't say anything. I let her continue. She said she'd had a conversation with Brett. A real one, without her running interference, and that he'd agreed to take a job he'd been offered through a friend, warehouse work, not what he'd hoped for, but steady. He was going to start looking for a place of his own. She said she was sorry she hadn't seen sooner how far things had gotten. I asked her if she meant it. She said she did. I believed her. I'm not entirely sure why, except that I've known this woman long enough to recognize when she's speaking plainly. Brett moved out 8 weeks later. He rented a room in a house in Brantford, close to the job. Louise helped him with first and last. I won't pretend to know where that money came from. and I made a decision not to ask. It wasn't from my accounts. That was enough. He comes for dinner occasionally now. He's quieter than he used to be, less performatively sullen. He's working. He bought his own phone plan. Small things, but I noticed them. Louise and I had work to do after all of it. We went to see a counselor, her suggestion, not mine, and I appreciated that she made it. It helped. We talked about things that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the patterns underneath. How she'd spent her whole life managing Brett's discomfort. How I'd spent mine managing mine, by withdrawing and waiting instead of speaking sooner. Neither of us was clean in this, but tell you what I know now that I only half knew before. When you retire and you've built something carefully over decades, savings, a house, a sense of stability, that's not selfishness, that's the shape of your life, and letting someone dismantle it quietly, piece by piece, while you keep telling yourself it's temporary, that's not generosity. That's something else, something closer to fear. I'm not afraid of those conversations anymore. I had the one that needed to happen, and I came out the other side still standing, still married, still in the house on the escarpment where my tomatoes are coming in, better than they have in years. The garbage truck still comes on Tuesdays. I still stand at the end of the driveway and watch it go. Some things at least stay exactly as they should be. I keep coming back to the moment I sat at that kitchen table with the bank statements open in front of me. The house quiet, everyone asleep. $1,900. $4,000 more from the joint account. Numbers on a screen, but what they really represented was something harder to name, the slow cost of saying nothing for too long. I don't think Louise set out to take advantage of me. I don't think Brett woke up every morning deciding to be a drain. People rarely do. What happens instead is something quieter and more gradual. A small ask becomes a habit becomes an assumption, and an assumption, left unchallenged, becomes the new normal. That's how 2 years passed. Not in one dramatic moment, but in dozens of small ones, where I told myself it wasn't worth the conversation. That's the part I had to sit with honestly. Because it wasn't just their choices that got us there, it was mine too. Every time I saw a charge I didn't recognize and let it go. Every time I noticed the transfers and looked away. I told myself I was being patient, being generous. But patience without honesty isn't a virtue. It's just delayed discomfort, and eventually that discomfort finds you anyway, usually at the worst possible moment. What I've learned, and I mean learned in the way you only learn things that cost you something, is that decency toward others has to include decency toward yourself. Helping Brett wasn't wrong. Helping him indefinitely, silently, while quietly resenting it was. Real integrity isn't just about how you treat the people who are struggling. It's about whether you're honest about what you can actually sustain, and whether you say so before things unravel. I wasn't. And that gap between what I felt and what I said is where all the damage accumulated. The clarity when it finally came didn't feel righteous. It felt like being cold. I just sat down with the facts, made the calls I needed to make, and waited. That kind of steadiness. Not anger, not drama, just the quiet decision to stop pretending. That took more out of me than I expected. I'd spent a long time managing my discomfort by withdrawing. Actually standing in the middle of it and speaking plainly was harder, but it held. I held. Brett is working now. He's got his own plan. Louise and I are still married and still figuring things out, which is its own kind of ongoing work. None of it resolved the way a tidy story would, but it resolved the way real life does, imperfectly, incrementally, one honest conversation at a time. If I had to tell someone anything from all of this, it would be that the problems we avoid don't disappear. They just grow interest. And the moment you decide to face them, Not when you're ready, not when it's comfortable, but when you finally can't justify the silence anymore. That moment is available to anyone. 63 years old, retired, sitting at a kitchen table in Hamilton. It's never too late to stop pretending the arrangement is fine when it isn't. The tomatoes are coming in well this year. I planted them myself. That still means something to me.